Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Glory to you, O Lord. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, but others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets." And he said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." And then he sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Location, location, location. These are the key words in real estate. And so it's important that be in locations. And this morning we're at Camp Nawakwa, which is so important to the faith of our synod and to personally our faith life as a family. But we attach significance to locations. Politicians want to give their key speeches in the right location. Announcing their candidacy, Barack Obama used Springfield, Illinois, where Lincoln announced his candidacy. Or Donald Trump riding down the escalator at Trump Tower. The place speaks. Lincoln, in the Gettysburg Address, said, "This ground cannot be hallowed or consecrated by what he said. It was consecrated by those men and what they did on that ground. Right here in our synod is sacred American ground. When you say Gettysburg, it means something distinct in American culture, a location, a setting. They matter in understanding the full impact of an event or a story. And today's gospel starts now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi. So often we let those kind of introductory sentences just go by. Caesarea Philippi was the region north of the Sea of Galilee, northeast of Galilee where Jesus had been teaching, and a region that had a long history. It was a region that was centered around false gods. It was centered around the culture of Rome. It originally was a Canaanite region which centered on the worship of the god Baal. Then it was a focal point of worship for the Greek god of mythology, Pan, the god of shepherd, who was known to spread anxiety, and thus we have the term panic, a word that perhaps we're too familiar with in these recent times. In addition, there was an underground stream that emerged from here. It still flows to this day, and the Greeks felt it was part of the river Styx. So how is your Greek mythology? The river Styx flowed where? It flowed between earth and the underworld. The river Styx flowed to the gates of Hades. But in Jesus' time, it had become a center of Roman influence. Philip, the tetrarch, a Jewish puppet leader who had renamed the region after Caesar and himself, Caesarea Philippi, many of the Roman conquerors favored this area because it was built to emulate Rome and its culture rather than the Jewish culture of Israel. It would be here that you would find temples to the Roman gods and a worship of Caesar. So this lesson, Jesus and the disciples inexplicably travel to the center of Roman power in the region, a place where Caesar was worshipped as God and King of the universe, and anointed by gods to be chosen as the one. To this place where the river flows to the gates of Hades. And standing there in that place, Jesus asked the disciples, "Who is it that people say the Son of Man is?" Meaning, Who do people say that I am? Which is an interesting start. It's sort of like me walking up to somebody and saying, have you heard about the Broadway show, Hamilton? Well, so-and-so said it was good, and Charlie told me it was really well done, and the tunes just stick in your head. It's just a report, though, of what you've heard. They have no personal stake for you. And so the disciples give reports of what they heard. Well, people say that you are John the Baptist or Elijah or Jeremiah, all inspired voices to the people of Israel, someone who speaks with authority on behalf of God. But then comes the tougher question, the question that calls for personal judgment. Not, have you heard about Hamilton, but have you seen it? And what do you say? Sometimes I'm happy to hide behind the church or scholarly thoughts, but when someone asks you directly, then it becomes personal and real. So in a Bible study that I once did, I was talking about the style of the book of Jonah, and what it could be a fable or a real story about a man. It could be this or it could be that. And then someone turned and said, but what do you say that it is? And now it becomes personal and real. Jesus asked the question of all the disciples, but there's just one lone voice that answers. There's just one lone voice that speaks out in this place where only Caesar is to be proclaimed as the chosen one, the anointed one, the king of the universe. And Peter says, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. We don't know what the other disciples were thinking at that moment. Perhaps they were thinking, man, I knew that. Or, boy, I wish I had said that. Maybe they were thinking, okay, Peter, we all get it, but did you have to say it here and now? Do you know where we are? Do you want us to get in trouble? Jesus praises Peter's confession and reminds Peter of what he said comes not from Peter's cleverness, but is revealed to him by God. And Jesus says that he is the rock, and on this rock the church will be built. Peter is standing against everything that the world around him is telling him. On this confession, this faithful man, this confession will be where the church is built. And the gates of Hades, the gates of the dominion of death, they will not stand against the church of Christ. And it is into this tradition that we stand today, boldly proclaiming the truth that Jesus is the Christ, the anointed one of God. Jesus is the living Son of God, and that he was crucified, died, and was buried, and was raised to new life. And we are the assembled people of God who believe in this confession. We are those who follow Jesus the Christ, who will stand against the powers of sin and death. It is this confession and the nature of Jesus Christ on which the church stands. We are the legacy of this confession, and we stand in this spot. And the question is, are we bold proclaimers of what we believe? We often hear that this is a Christian nation, that the vast majority of people living here claim to be Christian. But are we willing to boldly proclaim, to stand in the center of this culture and proclaim the teachings of Christ? Or do we waffle? Have you ever met someone who said, I think Jesus was a great man and a teacher, but the Son of God thing, the crucifixion, the resurrection, I can't buy that. This happens in American culture. Thomas Jefferson was of that thought. And I've met people like that. And I'd like to say that I stood boldly and proclaimed Jesus as the living Son of God. But sometimes I just listened. Because, well, I didn't want to offend. How about when we've stood in the Caesarea of our culture? Places in our culture that can overwhelm our faith. Perhaps when someone uses humor to demean someone's race or ethnic origin or sexual orientation. Those are awkward moments. Laugh, not laugh, walk away. Or the Caesarea of consumption. Do you have the latest cool phone, car, AirPods, variety of flower in your garden, sports equipment? The list goes on and on. A group of our Lutheran leaders, including deacons and pastors, recently took out an ad in the Gettysburg Times to speak against a local official. That official had denounced wearing masks during COVID or worshiping in digital gatherings. He quoted, or better, maybe misquoted, Martin Luther in our Lutheran teachings. A government official telling the church how we should conduct worship. This group of church leaders boldly stood in the public square and witnessed to their faith. And they did not speak from a political perspective, but rather from a gospel perspective. And yet they received incredible pushback for being political. Yet they spoke from the perspective of the gospel, and they witnessed to their faith. We stand in Caesarea often, but can we witness to our faith? It's hard, and we don't always do it. And I must tell you that in the face of the culture around us, I do not think that standing in Caesarea, I have always been strong. And I do not always like the question that Jesus asks. Sometimes it makes me squirm and feel uncomfortable. What do you say? This is what Jesus asked the disciples in a place that screamed of cultural answers that the disciples knew were wrong. Not what do people say, but what do you say? And suddenly it's personal and it's real. And the rubber hits the road. And Peter stood up and said it. And the rest waited for whatever reason. Every day of our lives, we have those moments. Moments to stand and say what we think. To witness to our faith and beliefs. In our schools, our workplaces, in our homes, in our community, in places of our culture. What do you say?